James Joseph Richardson was falsely accused of killing his 7 kids in the 1960s. James met his lovely wife in the 1950s, and her name was Annie Mae, and they had 7 beautiful kids together. In order for them to make a living and provide a roof over their head, they worked as fruit pickers. Their oldest 4 children were old enough to go to school, so the younger 3 needed a babysitter while they worked as fruit pickers. The Richardson put their trust in a neighbor named Miss Betsy to watch the youngest while they worked and the older kids went to school. Miss Annie Mae would prepare their food the night before the babysitter so the babysitter could warm up their food for the children the next day. The 4 oldest would come home for lunch and go back to school, but on this particular day, October 25th, 1967, the children became ill. All 7 of them were rushed to the hospital. 6 of the children died that night, and the 7th the following morning. The family was overwhelmed with grief, not knowing why their kids had passed away so suddenly, and not knowing why. And it was not just one that passed away, it was all 7. The police were called to figure out what happened to the Richardson children. An autopsy was given, and it determined that all 7 kids were poisoned. The police officers arrived at the hospital that day. It would be smart to search the Richardson home, they said, to find out what type of poison was given to the kids. The first search they didn't find anything, but after a couple more searches, they found some poison hidden behind a shed at the family's home on their property. During the funeral services, there was an open casket for all 7 children and for people to go around and view. As soon after the funeral, James was arrested for the murder of his children, and the Richardsons, Miss Annie Mae and Mr. James, were charged with neglect. They were charged with neglect because they had more than 7 kids at one period of time, and all of them had passed away. So the police chief knew there was no case against Mr. James, but the sheriff just knew that there was a motive behind him killing all of his kids. The parents took a lie detector test to prove their innocence, but James, the father of the 7 children, results proved that he was aware of his children being poisoned. The reason why Sheriff Klein thought that Richardson had poisoned his kids is because of a statement from an insurance broker who came to the family's home a couple weeks before the kids passed away. Mr. James had talked to the broker to take out an insurance policy on the entire family, but he couldn't afford the fees, so he sent the gentleman on his way to leave their home. This confession made Sheriff Klein believe that Mr. James was guilty of murder. 3 cellmates also testified against Mr. James, saying that he confessed to them while he waited for his trial 7 years later. It was said that these men's testimonies were not true. The other 2 cellmates had passed away, and the third confessed that he will be given a lighter sentence if he lied on Mr. Richardson. The babysitter who was in the care of the children when they became ill also testified. She confessed that she had poisoned the food that the mothers, Miss Annie Mae, prepared and left for her to warm up for the kids the next day. Betsy was out on parole for killing her ex-husband, in which they failed to mention in one of her testimonies. During the 60s, Mr. Richardson had an unfair trial as a black man because everyone against him was Caucasian, and that's what played a part in Mr. James being found guilty. There was no evidence against him, so during 1968, when Mr. James was charged, he was sentenced to death. James spent 5 years on death row before 1962. During that time, the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty in the U.S. was unconstitutional. This is what Mr. James needed because his life was saved. His sentence was reduced to life, and he would be up for parole in 1993. In 1988, a lawyer by the name of Mark Lane, who visited Mr. James on different occasions, picked up his case. He saw the unfair trial and knew that he could help Mr. James. During Lane's investigation, he found out that Miss Betsy, the woman that cared for the kids, confessed on many occasions in a nursing home where she lived. A nursing assistant heard Miss Betsy repeatedly speaking on the story of poisoning the children, but was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So her confession was overlooked because of her mental state. Mr. Richardson was released in 1989 when the case was reopened. It appeared in the same courtroom on the same date, October 25th, in the year of 1989. On the anniversary of his children's death, he was found not guilty and finally free. Mr. Richardson decided to file a lawsuit against DeSoto County for his suffering and all the years that he lost and wasted. He also had a heart condition and other cardiac issues due to poor medical care and stress during his time in prison. The lawsuit was basically explaining his wrongfully conviction, and he was awarded compensation for the suffering he experienced, but he only received around $150,000 of the expected $1.2 million. They just ripped him off. Mr. Richardson rekindled his relationship with his wife Annie Mae, and she was loyal to him the whole time he was away in prison. The relationship didn't work out between them two, so they went their separate ways, and Mr. Richardson remarried. This is so sad. I researched this story because this man spent 21 years in jail for a crime he did not commit. And it's not just him in this situation, it's so many black men that are accused of crimes that they did not commit. So I thank you guys for listening, and tell me what you think in the comment section. Do you have any friends or family members that are spending time in the penitentiary, in prison, for a crime they did not commit? Tell me what you think in the comment section.